Good evening. I'm Albert Carnesdale, Dean of the John F. Kennedy School of Government and Provost of Harvard University. And on behalf of the Joan Shorenstein Center on Press, Politics, and Public Policy and the school, it's my privilege to welcome you here this evening for the 4th annual presentation of the Goldsmith Awards. Before Fred Schauer comes to talk about the awards themselves, I'd like to say just a few words about the remarkable woman whose name the Goldsmith Awards bear. Berta Goldsmith lived her entire life in Philadelphia and died in 1989 at the age of 97. A former concert pianist and medical assistant, Mrs. Goldsmith left most of her fortune to charities in these fields. However, there was another area of special interest to her. She believed strongly in the important role of the press in a democracy. In her later years, she was a devotee of Washington Week in Review, Wall Street Week, and, yes, 60 Minutes. We were told that she did not suffer fools gladly, and that one of her criteria for judging a guest at her home was how intelligently he or she could discuss these shows with her. To Berta Goldsmith, those news programs represented excellence in their field, and the awards that have been named in her memory are presented in recognition of excellence in journalism. For we too, the Kennedy School, as an institution, believe in the importance of the press in a democratic society. It seems only natural that the Goldsmith Awards are administered through the school's Joan Shorenstein Center on Press, Politics, and Public Policy, for the center is dedicated to examining the intersection of theory and practice in these fields, something in which I imagine Berta Goldsmith would have been very, very interested. Now, to talk a bit about the awards, I'm pleased to introduce Fred Schauer, the Frank Stanton Professor of the First Amendment and the Acting Director of the Joan Shorenstein Center. Fred.
Thank you, Al. Although Al has disappointed me to some extent, one of the things that most of us were taught about addressing large groups is that we should start by saying not only something serious and important, which Al did wonderfully, but also something funny. I expected that Al would say something funny since, as everybody knows, I'm not a funny person, and I expected Al to take on the role of saying something funny. Al was wonderful in talking importantly about Berta Goldsmith and about why we have this program. Unfortunately, he did not say anything funny. I am not able to say anything funny, so you just have to settle with my dull self. Nevertheless, dull as it may be, I think there are important reasons to say a few words about why we have this program. Al said a few of them. I want to say a few more. This program is most visibly a program of awards. It is most visibly a program in which we honor public performances of a number of different varieties. But we call this a program because it is not just awards. The Goldsmith program, about which Al talked so eloquently, is a program that tracks most of the different things that this school does. It honors distinguished practitioners. It supports graduate students at the doctoral level and at the master's level. It supports reflection by practitioners who come to the school as fellows. It supports bringing in distinguished practitioners to reflect before us on their experiences. It supports faculty research. There are very few things that this school does that are not in some way and in some facet supported by the Goldsmith program. in many respects, the Goldsmith program in all of the different things it does, and I insist on calling it a program and not just awards, is as good an example as I can think of the diverse character of this school, the diverse character intellectually of the Joan Shorenstein Center, and I am delighted that the program exists. I'm delighted that Bob Greenfield, Jim Greenfield, and Louise Greenfield, the school's connection with the Goldsmith bequest, are here with us tonight. This entire program has been quite important to me in my own work personally and quite important to the school. I'd like to start tonight by introducing Pippa Norris. Pippa Norris is a political scientist, a prominent scholar on comparative politics, equally prominent on issues of women in politics, and also Associate Director for Research of the Shorenstein Center and lecturer on public policy in the Kennedy School. Pippa is going to describe the Research Awards part of the program and give this year's Research Awards. Pippa?
Thank you, Bob. Well, tonight I have the distinct privilege to be able to give the Research Awards and Fellowships for the Goldsmith Awards. And there could be few more pleasant tasks than encouraging people and giving financial support to very worthy scholarship and research that deserves support. Particularly, we can argue if the money is not my own and we can give them help. Now, the aim of the Goldsmith Awards has always been to support rigorous scholarship which investigates the interaction of the press and public policy. And that means both the relationship between government and the press, and also between the press and government. And tonight what I'd love to do is to introduce you to the winners of the awards. Now, some recipients can be with us tonight and some cannot. And what I'd like to do is to ask those who are with us to stand up when I mention their names so that we can see who's here. And if I can ask all the audience to refrain from clapping and applause until the very end of the complete list. It would help in terms of the management. I have 27 awards to mention, and I'd like to go through them all. Andy Warhol once spoke about how everybody had 15 minutes of fame. Well, I'm afraid tonight all that you have is 15 seconds, but we'll make the most of it as it is. Now, the awards are fairly diverse and cover a range of different areas. What I'm going to do is to put them into 4 different categories, which very much reflect the work of the Centre on a continuous basis. The first set of awards are for those who are working in the field of the media and public policy. Reflecting the central concerns of the Kennedy School, this has always been a major focus of the Centre. We've worked on different public policy areas. For example, colleagues have been working on issues like violence in children, the coverage of AIDS, the coverage of economic policy. And there are 12 awards in this category tonight. Firstly, James Ledbetter, who I believe is with us. If you'd like to just stand, thank you very much. Writer from the Village Voice, who is working on 30 years of public broadcasting in the United States, a topic that's very much part of the public policy debate right now, given the questions about funding for PBS. We also have with us William M. Boyd, if you'd like to stand, currently Lombard Professor at the Centre, who's visiting us from the Poynter Institute in Florida, and who is working on a project on the new media and the First Amendment, very critical issues about whether the First Amendment applies and our current framework applies when we're looking at issues like cyberspace and internet. Thank you. We also have with us Maria Tessier, a writer who is working on press coverage of hunger in America. Over there. A major issue and certainly of great interest in terms of the social policy debate going on right now about welfare. In addition, we have Tiffany Ting-Yu Wang from Northeast University, who has a project on institutional agenda setting in the local community. And a number of other colleagues who can't be with us, which I'd still like to mention and honor, are Douglas Arnold, Princeton University, who is working on a project on Congress, the press, and political accountability. What's being shown in the local press about individual congressional representatives, how much information about what they do, which is clearly of great importance given the renewed assertiveness of Congress. Stephen Frantz, US Naval Academy, who's working at the Kennedy School's favorite channel, C-SPAN. The Private Affairs of Public Affairs is the title of his project. Stephen Hess, very well known to all of us, at the Brookings Institute, who's working on 2 books, one on the media, one on the presidency. Adam Weissler, Columbia University, who's looking at how editorial opinion affects public policy issues. Maxwell McCombs, well known in the communication field, in particular on agenda setting, who, from the University of Texas, is now studying news and reality, the public's concern about crime, is how the newspaper covered crime actually reflecting the problem. Roy Oakert, Arkansas College, writing about the closing of the Arkansas Gazette. Ronnie Duggar, who's the former owner of the Texas Observer, who's joining us as a Goldsmith Fellow next semester. We very much welcome him to work on the effects of the concentration of media ownership on the press. And lastly, in this category, Jackie Sharkey, who's from the University of Arizona, who's also joining us as a Goldsmith Fellow next year to work on the First Amendment and the US press. So public policy is a major concern. The second category of awards are those which are concerned about international journalism. Now, the Centre has always been looking at a number of different issues, ranging from Bosnia, through Nigeria and the free press in China, developments in perestroika with Russia, issues of the Middle East, and so on, as well as developments in global communications. And in this area, we have 7 awards tonight. Firstly, we're delighted to have William Fox. Where is William? Here. Former press secretary to the Canadian Prime Minister, Brian Mulroney, visiting us as another of our Goldsmith Fellows. Bill is currently working on the questions about how far tabloidization of the press has changed press standards, and in particular the issue, has this had a major effect on the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, their ability to cover serious constitutional issues. So a major project, and we very much welcome you here. In addition, under this, Linda Yu. Where's Linda? Welcome. One of the Kennedy School of Government students who's worked in particular this semester on press coverage, the polls, and Clinton's foreign policy, with the basic question, are the polls now driving questions about US involvement in Haiti and Somalia, and so on. And we're delighted that this particular award will lead further because Linda's just been accepted as a doctoral student at the Kennedy Students. So I hope very much that this work will continue. In addition, Silvio Wasteboard, University of Pennsylvania, welcome, who's working on the press and political scandals in Latin America, a very critical area where the corruption can be affected by the coverage which the press puts forward. We also have in this a number of people who can't be with us. Jeffrey Smith, a colleague who was with us last semester, who was the former lead writer of the Times of London, who worked on Japan, and in particular how Americans saw Japan through American newspapers, right through from Pearl Harbor through to the modern collapse of the dollar. In addition, we have an award for Jay Shim, University of Missouri, Kansas City, who won an award for a project on news framing of North Korea, and in particular the North Korea nuclear program, a critical question about how we see our relations and how that leads to world peace. In addition, Betty Hansen, who joined us from the University of Connecticut at Storrs, who worked on framing international news. And rather than looking at the Western media, she focused on the Times of India and how that was covering international developments. And lastly, in this category, Lusig Dalian, member of the Armenian Parliament, looking at mass communications and democratic consensus in the former countries of the USSR. So international coverage is a major area that we feel very strongly we need to support. The third area, however, is a question which is equally important, diversity in the press. And here what we're looking at are questions about race and gender and how newspapers are covering these issues. In the past, we've had projects which have become very well known. For example, our coverage of the LA riots and how the press covered that. And we have new groups, one working on race and one working on women in the press, both sponsored by the Ford Foundation. This is, of course, a particularly topical issue. Yesterday was International Women's Day, and you might have noticed that for the very first time in 200 years, The Scotsman was published, and it was instead called The Scotswoman. It was a revolution in its way. And we have 5 awards in this category today. Firstly, Carol Conaway, if you'd like to stand. Just appointed as the assistant professor at the College of the Holy Cross. Carol's been with us for the semester, working in particular on the Crown Heights affair and how the identity of the participants has been framed by the press, so that the conflict between the Hasidic Jews and Afro-Caribbeans, how that was understood and how it was termed in the press very much a much simpler black-white conflict. And in addition, in this category, we have Keith Reeves, who is assistant professor at the Kennedy School, joined us also from Michigan, another one of the Michigan link here, who's using experiments and survey data, multi-method approaches, to look at how the press frames racial politics. And he has a new book which will be coming out next year, I think, with Oxford University Press, Voting Hopes and Fears, White Voters, Black Candidates and Racial Politics in America. In addition, we have Florence Graves, journalist, who is doing an important project on the imbalance between men and women in Washington, which again ties into our earlier focus on gender and the press. And two more of colleagues who can't be with us. Barbie Zieler from the Freedom Forum Media Studies Center, who's working on the image, the word, and the Holocaust to look at Jewish coverage. And lastly, in our last semester, we had Bill Newell, who is a senior producer from the News Channel, who visited as a Goldsmith Fellow, and his work was on race relations in newspapers, and not just as an abstract theoretical perspective, but what practical guidelines can be developed to really improve race relations using specific case studies in specific editorial rooms. The last area that we have is one where we've had, again, a long tradition in the centre, and quite simply, it's the media and election campaigns. The centre has worked on this in a number of ways, and we're very proud that we have a major study coming out next year with the University of Chicago by colleagues who've been associated, led particularly by Marianne Just, but also by others who are here today, such as Tim Cook. It's about the interaction of the media and the public and the politicians. And it's sure to break new ground when it's published. And in this category, we have three major awards also tonight. Firstly, Dan Hallin from the University of Chicago, San Diego, who's working on an important issue about how democracy is affected by television journalism in Mexico. For example, if one has accurate exit polls, does that really reduce voter fraud? Secondly, Holly Semetko, who was with us as a colleague from Syracuse University. And she's working on Germany, the news, democracy, and the electoral process, and it's part of a bigger, more comparative book of 4 different countries. And last but not least, Kim Campbell, who is a delightful fellow that we very much enjoyed last semester, former Prime Minister of Canada, of course, and she's working on how journalists see the ethical standards for journalism. What are the professional standards when they cover stories? She incorporated both personal experience and interviews with journalists. And this will form part of her book that will come out next year, and I'm sure will be widely of interest. So in sum, what are the Goldsmith Awards about? They are essentially the heart and soul of what we do at the centre. Research is a critical area. We've always published the results of some of this work, and we're very proud to be able to announce for the first time here that we're going further than this by launching our own journal. The new journal is going to be called the Harvard International Journal of Press Politics. I feel as I should go around with lots of subscription forms, but I'll resist doing that. And we feel that the field of press politics is rapidly expanding. Brand new research on a very important and critical public policy area. And we're very happy to be part of this development. We'd like to congratulate all the award winners for the work which they're going to be doing and for the work which they've already put in, and wish them all well in the future. Thank you very much.
Those of us who are neither journalists nor economists recognize that there are things that cannot be said in short articles and need to be explored in the full length of a book. We are delighted that one part of the Goldsmith program is an award for a book-length treatment about a question primarily about the press and its effect on political life, or about the media, or about journalism. To present the Goldsmith Book Award this year, I want to introduce Richard Parker, economist, journalist, founder of Mother Jones Magazine, long time with Ramparts Magazine, now completing an intellectual biography of John Kenneth Galbraith, and also now senior fellow of the Shorenstein Center, and now adjunct lecturer at the Kennedy School. Richard?
First of all, I owe you all an apology. There are so many of these award ceremonies here at the Kennedy School that I received a memo last month saying that I would be co-presenting this award with Barbra Streisand, and as a consequence, have spent the last 3 evenings in my shower practicing the song, "People Who Need Policy Are the Luckiest People in the World." Since it's solo tonight, I will decline to do that performance and go right to the book award. This is something, the subject is something which I'm sure you're all aware and concerned about. That is the future of public broadcasting in America. In an era when there's a great hue and cry over the very existence of public broadcasting in America, I was struck by the remarks of America's great essayist E.B. White in 1967 when he was asked about what the purpose of public television ought to be. He said, "It should be the visual counterpart of the literary essay, should arouse our dreams, satisfy our hunger for beauty, take us on journeys, enable us to participate in events, present great drama and music, explore the sea and the sky and the woods and the hills. It should be our Lyceum, our Chautauqua, our Minskys, and our Camelot. It should restate and clarify the social dilemma and the political pickle." Well, unfortunately, PBS at the moment is in a great political pickle. One might even suggest the largest kosher pickle barrel that one has seen in the field of broadcasting for some time. As a consequence, I hope that a great many people in Washington and elsewhere concerned about the future of public broadcasting will pay attention to the book which is receiving the Goldsmith Book Prize this evening. The title of the book is Public Television for Sale: Media, the Market, and the Public Sphere. And not only because of the topic, but because of the outstanding scholarship of its author, William Hoynes, I think it provides an excellent starting place for what an authentic debate ought to be about the role of public broadcasting in America. Neither panegyric nor philippic, it takes public broadcasting seriously, examining both its strengths and weaknesses and proposing a number of changes and improvements which will actually cause it to have even hopefully greater positive impact on American political and cultural discourse. Therefore, on behalf of the Goldsmith Book Awards, I'm delighted to present Professor William Hoynes, Assistant Professor of Sociology, Vassar College, with the Goldsmith Book Prize for Public Television for Sale. Professor Hoynes.
Thank you very much, Richard, and I want to thank the Center and the Goldsmith Awards and Bill Gampson, who has helped me with my research for many years, and particularly with this project. And I want to take a couple of minutes to make a few remarks. I'm not particularly humorous either, but I actually have a somewhat humorous story. I was home this morning in Rhinebeck, New York, 200 miles away from here, thinking what I should say this evening when I came here. I'd been thinking about it for some time, and as I do each Thursday, I was home with my 2-year-old, and I thought, what can I do with him to occupy him while I think? And it was 9 a.m., and Sesame Street was on. It occupied him for half an hour while I thought, and it was something that I actually felt comfortable allowing him to be occupied with that for a variety of reasons, which I'm sure many of you are familiar. What I want to quickly say today, very briefly, is that when I began writing this book, 1988, 89, when I wrote the first draft in 1990, 91, when I revised it in 1992, 93, and now we're in 95, the landscape, the political landscape around public broadcasting has changed dramatically at each one of those stages. So the revision between the first draft and the actual published work had to take account of what happened in 1992, where there was a very vociferous attack on public television within the Congress, particularly in the Senate. And public television withstood this, public broadcasting more generally, but it was mostly aimed at PBS. Withstood this attack. Actually, there was an increase in federal funding that appeared to bring support from a variety of citizens groups out of the woodwork. I never could have imagined the changes that would have occurred after the 1992 assault, as I like to characterize it, between then and now. And obviously the terrain has changed dramatically, and it would appear to me that public broadcasting now is really facing the biggest crisis of its now almost 30-year existence. And my concern, as Richard suggested, is that we have not even begun to talk about the fundamental questions about public television in this debate that's been going on since the November elections. After the November elections, it became pretty clear that public TV would be on the chopping block. The question is how much and when. What I want to suggest, and what the book tries to do, is to try and think about what the meaning of public is in the context of public broadcasting. And in particular, I talk about two things which I think have not really been discussed in this context, at least in the last 4 or 5 months. One of those is, how can we think about public television as being something other than simply non-commercial television? Is there a meaning of public that is beyond, that it doesn't have commercials, which in fact, PBS increasingly has something that might approximate commercials. The other is, how can we think about a public television system that is other than a government or state-run television system? And what comes to mind immediately is that over the past several months, we've seen an effort by the state, in essence, to rein in public television, to try and suggest what public broadcasting should and should not do. My sense is that people who are critics of public TV, people who are defenders of public TV, people who may be supporters of public television, will all benefit from a discussion about what this meaning of public is, trying to broaden the discussion and really try and look at why we should have a public television system in the first place. Something that I certainly think we need. I'd like to make it more public indeed than it is right now. Thank you. Sorry about Nobel describing. I would have
Thank you. The centerpiece of the Goldsmith program remains the awards for investigative journalism. This was not only a great interest of Berta Goldsmith, but is also a central part of the social watchdog function that the press serves. Yet in giving an award for investigative journalism, we not only reward past achievement, but, we hope, create an incentive for future achievement. In doing so, we therefore have some ability here to make a statement not only about what investigative journalism is, but also about what we here and those on the selection committee would like it to be. This year, we were especially fortunate that the is and the ought were closer than is often the case in much of public life. One of the features that to all of the members of the selection committee, and we thank them all, and they are all listed on the back of your program, felt was both important and present for all of these finalists, was that all of the finalists in their efforts transcended just the watchdog function, however important it is. These particular efforts, all of them, were not just, although they were all that, they were not just the rooting out of wrongdoing, they were not just gotcha. In addition, they provided for the public an illuminating picture of the operation of an important segment of public life. The ability to do that, the ability to provide that illumination and information about a large segment while at the same time exposing either wrongdoing or inefficiency is investigative journalism at its best. In a few minutes, I will say a bit about each of the final entries, but this is not the Academy Awards. This is not Miss America. I want to minimize the suspense. I am delighted this year to announce this year's winner of the Goldsmith Award for Investigative Journalism. Lizette Alvarez, and Lisa Getter. Maybe I should retract what I just said about the nature of the ceremony. I am delighted to recognize as this year's winners Lizette Alvarez, who is not with us, and Lisa Getter of the Miami Herald for a 7-part series on American immigration policy. This series was, as I said about many of the other entries, all that investigative reporting should be. It was an important and previously uninvestigated topic. It showed extraordinary effort. It gave the readers a full explanation of how a very complex public system, the immigration system, operates. And it provided a balance, and it has turned out highly influential critique of existing flaws and inefficiencies in the system. As I mentioned, Lizette Alvarez is not here, but I'm delighted to present the certificate and the award to Lisa Getter.
I think in most projects like this, people wonder, was it really a 50-50 effort? And I just want to say that Lisette and I were equal partners in this project, and she would be here today, but Castro decided to give the Miami Herald a visa, and she's in Cuba, and she would be here otherwise. And I'd also like to thank the Miami Herald for allowing us 10 months to investigate immigration policy in America. As many of you know, there is no issue that affects more people in Miami than immigration. 95% of our growth in the last decade has been attributed to immigration. And what Lisette and I found out was that no agency mattered more to the way immigration is enforced in this country than INS. And INS was not doing its job. And I'm glad to say that we were the first newspaper to really take a hard look at INS and reveal the problems that agency faces. Many of its own mismanagement, many problems because Congress had not funded laws that they had revised in the last 10 years. We tried to put it into context, and I think we did a great public service, not only to our readers in Miami, but to readers all over who have requested the series. And I thank Harvard. Harvard this year has been very good to me. For those of you who don't know, I have a cheering squad here. I'm a Neiman Fellow, and I guess the drinks are on me tonight.
Although being one of the other finalists does not bring the $25,000 award that the winner of the prize share, I do want to talk a little bit about the other finalists, ask them to come up to the stage and receive our recognition. The other finalists were first Walt Bogdanich, producer for ABC News, Day One, for a 2-part series, Smokescreen, detailing the management of nicotine content in cigarettes by the tobacco industry. I'm pleased to honor not only an important series, but also, especially in light of our special guest tonight, to recognize a particularly effective example of television investigative journalism. Mr. Bogdanich is not here tonight, but John Martin, the reporter for both of the segments, is, I believe, with us. If you would come up. Right there. Next, we have Susan Feeney and Steve McGonigal of the Dallas Morning News for a 3-part series on the actual operation, the actual effect of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. I especially liked it because all too often public reporting of law and the actions of the courts focuses on decisions and not on the effects of those decisions, by outlining how court decisions in this crucial area of voting rights interpret and at times delimit and at times constrict the law. This series more broadly gives readers an idea of how law can have an effect, and when its effect is far less than people may think. Susan Feeney, Steve McGonigal. Next, Dan Morgan of the Washington Post for How Medicaid Grew, an incredibly detailed case study of how Congress actually works. A story that doesn't look like the one that most of us learned in How a Bill Becomes a Law in high school, in explaining how seemingly minor provisions are inserted non-publicly and then have major financial and political effects on the growth of programs. This series, focusing on Medicaid, undeniably important these days, is also especially timely as we debate questions about budgets, their balance, their imbalance, and how we have gotten to where we are. Dan Morgan. Charles Neubauer, Mark Brown, and Michael Briggs of the Chicago Sun-Times wrote an extraordinarily important story on the Rostenkowski investigation. The end of this story, or close to the end of this story, is now well known. The middle of this story is now well known. This series was, in a very important way, there at the beginning of this story. We are delighted to recognize here especially, as is so often important and so often under-recognized in investigative journalism, those who were there first. Sorry. Finally, Joseph Shapiro, Penny Loeb, Susan Hedden, Dave Bowermaster, Andrea Wright, and Tom Toke for Separate and Unequal in the U.S. News and World Report, an incisive and again highly influential report on special education programs in the United States. For those who think that investigative reporting is all glamour, think about examining 23,106 discrimination cases to examine the racially disproportionate effect of many of America's special education programs. Are you? For all of you, my gratitude, our gratitude, and we have certificates for all of you. All of you, thank you again for contributing so importantly to American democracy. Before I turn the program over, I want to thank those who don't get to stand on the stage. Like investigative reporting, which is in important respects done when it is invisible as well or as significantly as the final product. All of the facets of the Goldsmith program work not because of me, not because of Marvin Kalb, not because of Pippa Norris, not because of Richard Parker, not because of Al Carnesale, but because of hard work often done behind the scenes. I want to thank Julie Felt, Edie Holway, Nancy Palmer, Jennifer Quinlan, and especially Michelle Johnson for making sure these are the people who ensure that the legacy of Berta Goldsmith is honored in such a diverse and effective way. Now I'm going to get off the stage. In doing so, I'm pleased to introduce the not acting, but the real director of the Joan Shorenstein Center on the Press, Politics, and Public Policy. That is Marvin Kalb, the Edward R. Murrow Professor of Press and Politics at the Kennedy School of Government, presently visiting professor at George Washington University, and someone who's returned to this school after a sabbatical on July 1st. We all eagerly await. Marvin Kalb.
Fred, thank you very much. It's really a pleasure for me to be back and to introduce my friend and old colleague. I ask you all this evening to imagine for just a moment this absolutely terrifying thought. You're a senior official of the U.S. government. You may even be a controversial mayor of a small Midwestern American town. It's 2 o'clock in the morning and you're sound asleep. The phone rings. Your wife or husband or significant other, as they put it these days, answers it and then slowly, very slowly, intones the following words. It's Mike Wallace. What shall I say? Now, 1,000 imaginative lies have been uttered in response to that very simple question. Because this is no ordinary correspondent. He's 76 years old. He's been in the business now for more than half a century. He doesn't have more than a few gray hairs in his head, just a few. And he shows no signs of retiring to the University of Michigan, which is his alma mater, or anywhere else, it seems. He has put the fear of God, or imprisonment, or embarrassment into more politicians or officials than anyone else I know in this business. As the lead, indeed the founding correspondent of the trailblazing news magazine 60 Minutes, Mike Wallace has been responsible on Sunday evenings for more anxiety attacks, more ulcers, more premature retirements or resignations in America's sprawling bureaucracy than most reporters. I said he's no ordinary correspondent. Just listen to the things he did before 60 Minutes, before he joined CBS News in 1963. He narrated episodes from such radio classics as The Lone Ranger and The Green Hornet. Now, just for my own curiosity, a show of hands. Who has ever heard The Lone Ranger and The Green Hornet? All right. So you got all kinds of things. Silver. Yeah, but what about Ma Perkins? The Guiding Light. Wallace narrated those programs too. And while he was doing these things, he was also doing news programs and interview programs. He actually did the air radio edition of the Chicago Sun-Times, News and Information, back in the early 1940s. He was also an actor, making his television debut in 1949 as Lieutenant Anthony Kidd in the ABC series Stand By for Crime. There were also appearances in Suspense on CBS and a play called Reclining Figure on Broadway. As he struggled through the 1950s to define this phenomenon called Mike Wallace, and probably to earn a living, which we all have to do, he hosted game shows Now listen to the names of these shows. Who's the Boss? What's in a Word? Guess Again. The Big Surprise. The $100,000 Big Surprise. And Who Pays? He also began in this time frame to do interviews, piercing, penetrating interviews. I remember Nightbeat, a program on Channel 5, I think, in New York especially, was started in 1956. For those of you who did see this show, you'll remember these dark background, very tight shots of the person being interviewed, back of the head shots of Wallace, smoking a la Edward R. Murrow. It was all very dramatic stuff. In the early 1960s, Mike Wallace resumed his on-again, off-again relationship with CBS, only this time in the more formal, serious role as a correspondent. Wallace went to Vietnam in 1962 as the war began to grow in size and importance. A year later, he was named a CBS News correspondent, and many of us at the time believed it was in direct recognition of the professionalism of his work covering this war. And he continued to return to Vietnam time and again through the 60s and into the 70s. In 1968, 60 Minutes was created, and the rest, as they say, is history. Mike Wallace has won 15 Emmy Awards, 2 DuPont Awards from Columbia University, 3 times the Peabody Award winner from the University of Georgia, and countless other honors. In 1991, he was inducted into the Hall of Fame of the Academy of Television Arts and Sciences, and in 1993, he was named Broadcaster of the Year by the International Radio and Television Society. Last fall, something very unusual happened to Mike Wallace. CBS News publicly reprimanded him and his producer for secretly taping an interview with a freelance writer without her knowledge. Eric Ober, the president of CBS News, said, and I quote, "The surreptitious taping was a violation of CBS News standards. It was a violation of journalistic ethics. They used very, very poor judgment," unquote. Wallace called the writer and apologized. He explained that he would never have used any of the taping without first informing the writer. There is no doubt in my mind that Wallace meant what he said, that he would have checked with her first. There is also no doubt in my mind that he should never have taped the interview without first informing the writer. This incident says a great deal about journalistic practices and journalistic ethics, and it also says a great deal about investigative reporting on network television. But it is testimony to the integrity and the professionalism of Mike Wallace that he has come here to talk about this incident and much more in his extraordinary life and career. I am honored, as a friend and a colleague, to welcome Mike Wallace to the Goldsmith Awards ceremony.
When Marvin called last fall, I figured it was probably to inquire if I had the appetite to come up here yet again for another of his regularly scheduled trashings of the Westmoreland documentary of about, with which I was involved about a decade ago. It's been a staple of his curriculum here, the trashing of that documentary. Below these many years. So what he asked was, would I like to say a few words on the night of the Goldsmith Awards? I figured, well. And he offered to pay my airfare. What the dickens, why not? I like him, I like Cambridge. I even studied here at Harvard back in 1943 for about 4 months to be a naval communications officer. Lived over here in Weld Hall. Then he called back and said that he had forgotten one small item, that I was to get one of the Goldsmiths myself. And he said that he would still pay my airfare. Well, to get this kind of recognition from my old CBS News colleague, who before he defected to the opposition at NBC, where they gave in to his ludicrous demands for more money, more airtime, and grander office space than CBS saw fit to lavish on him. To get that kind of recognition from him and from the distinguished men and women who serve as judges here, recognition for a body of work, that was a joy to contemplate, so here I am. I was thinking back to the days that we shared at CBS News, Marvin, after I got through with the Lone Ranger and the Green Hornet and various other undertakings. On the clicker, I should say, what we called the clicker each night on the evening news with Walter Cronkite, there were stories from names like Charles Collingwood in London, Winston Burdett in Jerusalem, Roger Mudd at the Capitol, Richard C. Hartelet at the UN, Dan Rather in Dallas, Morley Safer in Saigon, Harry Reasoner at the White House, Peter Kalischer in Paris, Dan Shore in Bonn, Eric Severide in Washington, and Marvin Kalb in Moscow. What a crowd. And what satisfaction to be part of a team like that one. Regrettably, though, in today's climate, I'm afraid that there is not the same kind of feeling, a good deal less admiration than there was back then for the public perception of us and our profession. More frequently today, there is ever harsher judgment of us and what we turn out. And I don't like to be a skunk at this particular garden party, but nonetheless. Criticism of the press is not anything new. It's as old as the Republic, as we all know. But what is new is the intensity and the volume of criticism that is coming from within the press itself. Last December on Meet the Press, David Broder lamented the lack of some mechanism, some way to make us more responsible. David Brinkley wondered about the same thing on his broadcast, Sunday morning broadcast in January. America goes tabloid, blasts the cover of Newsweek. Press trapped in its own cynicism, blares the Wall Street Journal. News as the enemy of hope, deplores the New York Times. It seems that in virtually every newspaper and magazine I pick up, I see some kind of self-flagellation. Few recent examples: unnecessary and deliberate cruelty. That comes from Abe Rosenthal, who used to run the Times, in his column in the New York Times now. Mean-spiritedness, lowest common denominator journalism, Marvin Kalb. Sanctimony and a love of sensation, snideness and aggression, a weird free-form nastiness, spleen without purpose, Adam Gopnik in the New Yorker. And this does not even count the time-honored complaints about accuracy and fairness and conflict of interest and checkbook journalism. In our once romantic profession, the hair shirt is replacing the trench coat. Make no mistake about it, this is more than rhetoric, and the ramifications are significant, well beyond the now familiar lamentations about sacrificing serious journalism on the altar of profits, circulation, ratings. Are we, in fact, trashing our right to the public trust? Perhaps the most sobering measure of how far we have fallen in the hearts and minds of the public, whose trust, after all, is the coin of our realm, is to remember that it was back in 1971 that a poll revealed one of our number to be the most trusted man in America. Unfortunately, Uncle Walter's voice is heard all too seldom these days. Listen to some recent numbers. In a 1994 Wall Street Journal NBC News poll on honesty and trustworthiness, only 21% of respondents rated the news media very or mostly honest. 21%. The president scored 37. And that statistic was echoed in a survey last fall by Republican pollster Frank Lutz for the Hudson Institute, which found that, quote, confidence in the news media had fallen below confidence in the government. I think that probably was a first, but it's still falling. The 1994 Gallup Public Confidence Poll revealed that only 29% of Americans, 29%, express a great deal or quite a lot of confidence in newspapers. That's 29%, down from 51% in 1979. Television news fared just a little better with 35%, but a hollow margin, and ominous because it's down 11 points from last year. And it was the worst plunge of all institutions in that new poll. The public, said U.S. News and World Report in January, the public these days does not merely dislike the press, it hates it. Moreover, the number of people with an unfavorable view of television news has doubled in just the past year. These are people who consider us, quote, unnecessarily adversarial, negative, insensitive, irresponsible, and arrogant. And this erosion of public trust is forging a consensus among more than a few serious journalists that the time has finally come, yet again, to do something about it. John Hughes asked in the Christian Science Monitor, could a press council improve journalism? Now, as some of us remember, there used to be one, a news council, way back in 1973 when public confidence in the media had sagged under the weight of assaults on the media by the Nixon administration. A national news council was in fact formed to serve the public interest in preserving freedom of communication and advancing accurate and fair reporting of news. It was a place to turn to when people across the country felt that a news story was inaccurate or unfair. Independent forum with objective experts. The News Council did not have the power to sanction or punish, except through the glare of publicity. But unfortunately, there was so little enthusiasm for it among working journalists that it didn't garner much publicity, and it lasted just 10 limping years. Why? Mainly because some leading journalists, especially Abe Rosenthal, who was running the New York Times at the time, and he acknowledges it, and Walter Cronkite, and some others, claimed that it was superfluous at best, and worse, that it would somehow shackle a free press. Some major news organizations, including CBS, under Dick Salant, supported the council. But as I said, it didn't get much help from a whole lot of news organizations, and so it slowly withered and died. Should it be resurrected? I think a case can be made for it now. All of us journalists, all of us who criticize, study, write about journalism, are quite willing to call attention to profligate politicians and priests and potentates, but we show very little enthusiasm when similar attention is focused upon us. Of course, there are ombudsmen here and there, thanks in no small part to the old National News Council, and most of us have guidelines or codes or standards and practices manuals. But do we read them, or do we just tack them up on the wall so they're handy if somebody calls with a complaint? Dick Salant, who was the late longtime president of CBS News, was an outspoken champion of the News Council from its beginning. He sat on the task force that established it and later served as its president. And in his foreword to the Council's Death Knoll report in 1983, after 10 years of trying, he said, "I refuse to believe that a concept so important and so sound as that which gave birth to the News Council cannot be brought to reality. It's imperative that the effort be renewed and continued." Now, the National News Council was not set up to send anybody to jail, not to fine anybody, not to collect dues or hand out certificates of qualification to reporters, not to do any of that, but rather to act as a kind of jury of our peers. It was composed of broadcasters and print people and academics to receive complaints, look into them, and if warranted, to publicize what amounts to journalistic malpractice. And that most trusted American I mentioned a while back, Walter Cronkite, who was originally dead set against the News Council, here's what Walter said in eulogizing his former boss, Dick Salant, at his memorial service 2 years ago. In the 70s, he said, "I thought it was the worst idea I'd ever heard in my life, that we should put judgment as the kind of job we did in the hands of another group somewhere outside our immediate profession, outside our immediate workplace." But I think now, as I look back on it, that Dick Salant was probably right. Now, I know that the vast majority of journalists still will be, at first blush, dead set against a revised News Council, a revived News Council. Abe Rosenthal took a certain pride in killing it first time around. He still waxes eloquent on the subject. In order to have a news council, he says, you have to have regulations, and I am against regulation of the press, including self-regulation, except within each individual newspaper or broadcast station. I think that Abe sets up a straw man. We're not talking about regulation. I'm not talking about prescribed do's and don'ts beyond the obvious, accuracy and fairness. And I'm not raising the specter of the government possibly looking over our shoulders, although LA Times media critic David Schauer, a self-described First Amendment absolutist, told me he thinks that a national news council may be the best way to keep the government from looking over our shoulders. What I am suggesting is what Dick Salant had in mind. Reasonably qualified people sitting down and considering whether or not they perceive a given piece of reporting warrants holding it up to public scrutiny as flawed, as dishonest. And if it is, then let the public know about it. What kind of malpractice am I talking about? Marvin mentioned one. Let's begin with me in 60 minutes. Not, mind you, that you're going to find yourself overjoyed that tonight's honoree considers himself guilty of malpractice. Nonetheless, you may have read that it was with my knowledge and consent that we placed a tiny hidden camera in the drapes of my office to catch on videotape the answers to my questions by a female reporter who had agreed to talk to us on the record, and had agreed to have us quote her. What she hadn't agreed to was to go on camera. Why? She didn't like lights, camera, the tension that goes with it, she said. But unfairly, unethically, we decided we knew better, and so we taped her, though she didn't know it. We were certain that once she saw herself on the tape, she'd agree to let us use it. But before we could do that, a mole inside our shop passed the information on to Howard Kurtz, who writes about the media for the Washington Post, the result, a front-page story in the Post. Worth a front page? Surely not. But it made certain the story would be picked up nationally. I did a mea culpa, called her to apologize. She apologized back because she was distressed that we were under fire and asked how she might help. How could you help? I said, show up tomorrow and go on camera this time to tell me what you said last time that you were here. She did. We taped her. We broadcast the piece the following Sunday. No harm done to her, nor to the story. The only harm done was self-inflicted. Malpractice? Absolutely. We had lied to an interviewee. Another potential nominee. Shouldn't the public know about financial journalists who use their positions for personal profit? Shouldn't the readers of Smart Money magazine, for instance, know that columnist James Kramer saw the value of 3 stocks that he owned and wrote about in the February issue of Smart Money shoot up by more than $2 million? His readers know that he's a professional money manager and that he owns the stocks he writes about, but not the size of his holdings. And of course, readers had no way of knowing that he continued to buy large amounts of that stock before his piece was published, thus sending the volume surging and the stock prices soaring, with a huge paper profit to him. Shouldn't readers know this? Another example. Most journalists, 80 to 90% of whom personally favor abortion rights, according to major media studies, say their reports are impartial. But a recent LA Times study of national coverage of abortion in the last 18 months finds that the press much too often appears to come down in its news columns and its pictures on the side of the pro-choice crowd. Abortion is about the rights of women, or it is about the rights of the fetus. As media critic David Schauer pointed out in his recent series on the subject in the LA Times, when Time magazine published the cover story on abortion last year, the cover was the drawing of a woman. 2 months later, a Newsweek cover story on abortion featured a photo of a pregnant woman. Neither depicted a fetus. Shaw pointed out that women buy magazines, fetuses don't. It was obvious to him that both news magazines were making an editorial statement with their covers. I believe that a revived News Council is worth a second shot. But barring that, I have another proposal, one much easier to accomplish. And that is the establishment by this school of an annual covey of citations, perhaps a half dozen of them, to shine the spotlight of obloquy, of public scrutiny, on those individuals or publications who commit the most egregious sins against the standards and principles of responsible journalism. Citations that would censure practices that diminish the public trust in us, that would draw a line in the sand that journalists could not ignore. Because awards, as all of us here tonight know, awards are one thing we all care about. A Pulitzer Prize follows you, identifies you for as long as you live. It brands you somehow as a reporter, an editor, columnist, photographer, a cut or two above the rest. In broadcast journalism, the DuPonts from Columbia, the Peabodys, have been around a long time and mean a lot. The Goldsmiths, they're newer, of course, but because they come from here, judged by such as you, they are achieving the recognition and the prestige they deserve. And my getting one will diminish their luster only a little. I believe that such a group of citations coming from an institution like this one here in Cambridge would be very effective. Anyone could nominate a candidate. The eventual winners or losers would be determined by a panel of qualified judges, reporters, editors, journalism professors. Annual citations for journalistic malpractice coming from here would get attention nationwide. You can count on it. They would trigger amens across the country as it dawned on a skeptical, fed-up public that somebody is finally acting as their ombudsman. Jim Lehrer of McNeil-Lehrer summed it up a while back. He put it to the American public this way: do not tolerate lousy, arrogant, snide journalism. Complain and don't watch those news programs. Don't read those newspapers. Don't listen to that program. You here at the Kennedy School could help get that message across. Thanks for listening, and I'll take your questions, hostile or benign.
Let me first give you a Goldsmith Career Award for excellence in journalism for my club.
Thanks very, very much, Mark. Thank you.
We've got two microphones here, and come forward as you like, and an opportunity to ask Mike Wallace a question or two. Jim, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, Mr. Wallace, when the Kennedy School starts issuing these citations for journalistic malpractice, do you think that Marvin should pay the airfare for the people who are coming here to receive the awards?
I doubt it. It would be fascinating, actually. No. It would be fascinating to have people who are cited. Look, you're going to avoid it like the plague, but if you're cited, have them come here. Explain how it happened. And they would. They would come, and you would learn, we would all learn a great deal about what it is to work in the field, doing that kind of thing over and over and over. It would be a very useful thing in my estimation. I mean, come on. This time of year, every year, there is this garden of self-congratulation that grows. Really. I mean, we're full of self-praise and deserved praise, self-praise. But there's another side to the coin.
I'm Carol Gentry. I'm a reporter for the St. Petersburg Times. I'm up here as a research fellow this year.
For the what?
St. Petersburg Times. And I'm curious about, have you thought through the effects of what you're doing and how it might cause a lot more newspapers or reporters to be sued?
Sued?
Yeah. The gutsy kinds of journalism tend to bring out lawsuits already, and I'm wondering if that would just be a further nail in dissuading newspapers and TV media from doing that kind of journalism.
You know something? When we were sued for $120 million by William Westmoreland for a piece that was dead accurate despite certain things were done in the production of that broadcast, and the producer of that broadcast has acknowledged it, and he knows how I and the rest of us feel. But the fact of the matter is that there was indeed a deception that went on as to the number of, I won't rehearse the whole thing, as to the number of enemy troops that were out there. And the only reason that the Vietnam deception took place about the number of troops was because we had to keep William Westmoreland felt he had to keep the American public satisfied that it was conceivable that we might win, that there weren't too many people out there on the other side. In any case, we won the case. We've been doing 60 Minutes for 27 years. We have never lost one suit. There was talk that that kind of suit by William Westmoreland was going to chill and so forth. Good, accurate, fair, thorough reporting. It's a very expensive undertaking on the part of the plaintiff to undertake to sue for libel. And if indeed you aren't careful enough, we aren't careful enough, there has to be some penalty paid. My own belief is, however, that the English are correct when they say if you sue and lose, you pay the cost of the defense. And that will make people think 2 and 3 and 4 times before they sue for libel.
Just a second.
Yes, sir.
Before you go too far now, on this particular story.
Yes,
let us
Professor.
Let us say that it was just in the Washington Post. The story was in the Washington Post that Westmoreland probably exaggerated the numbers, and perhaps even doctored the books, although that was not a direct charge in your program anyway. Do you think that Westmoreland would have sued anybody? Would he have sued the Washington Post?
He was told by Clark Clifford, Edward Bennett Williams, I can't tell you how many attorneys he went to, all of whom, each of whom said, don't do it, don't sue, you will lose. And finally, they got a young man by the name of Dan Burt, who worked for the Capital Legal Foundation, which was a conservative-funded operation run by, funded by Richard Scaife, a Mellon, and who picked up the entire tab. Yes, they would have sued. I mean, look.
You think they would have sued if it was just in a newspaper?
Didn't Mobile sue the Washington Post?
Yes.
Tabula Reyes?
No, but I'm asking about Westmoreland. What aggravated Westmoreland
was
the way in which he was portrayed. The tight shots, the sweating face.
Poor fellow. He licked his lips a lot because I had him. Wait a minute. Wait a minute. He licked his lips a lot and had to say, well, the people were simply too unsophisticated to understand what I was up to. That was what he said.
Burton Benjamin.
Yes.
Former senior vice president of CBS News.
Correct.
Graduate of the University of Michigan with you.
Right.
A dear friend of both of us.
Right.
Did a long study.
Right.
On behalf of CBS News.
Correct.
And concluded that this program was badly put together and misrepresented the facts, but did not not argue that the facts were wrong.
He did not argue that the facts were wrong.
But
right.
did say they were presented very badly.
He suggested, and he was dead right, that certain things took place in the production of the broadcast that should not have taken place that way.
Now, don't you think that should be examined?
Oh, hell yes.
That's what we do in class.
Good. Question. Please don't put it back on the curriculum, Marvin. I don't want to come up here again and again to straighten you out. Yes.
Kurt Levy, I'm a student at the law school. You cited figures, media surveys that showed that 80–90% of journalists sided with pro-choice on abortion issues, and I've seen similar figures concerning a lot of liberal positions and similar figures for journalists voting Democratic, et cetera, et cetera. Given that humans are not completely objective and will always let some of their personal feelings slip through, do you feel
Humans
those-
aren't, but reporters are always
That's right, I forgot. Journalists aren't human, I forgot about that. But do you feel that those statistics back up the claim that there's a liberal bias in the media? If so, why do you think there is that bias? And as a third question, whether that bias is real or perceived, do you think it accounts for the increasing popularity of conservative talk radio?
Is there a liberal bias in the media generally? Perhaps a little. On the issue of abortion, how many here, honest, raise your hand, how many here are pro-choice? How many here are pro-life? QED. And the fact of the matter is, and we're just talking about that one issue, we're all professionals, and we're all going to write it in a dispassionate way. But somehow, according to David Shaw, and if you know David Shaw's work, he's one of the best media critics. I mean, he really is a thorough. He makes his career at the LA Times, and they give him thousands and thousands of words all the time to do all kinds of things. And he did he took forever to write this piece, or this series of pieces. So, your other question was the talk radio?
Right.
Yeah, and I'm convinced. Marvin, may I say? Marvin's in the middle of writing a book about this subject. I'm absolutely persuaded that talk radio, that Rush Limbaugh and some of the others, is absolutely comes out of what is the perception in America that the media elite does not reflect their views sufficiently. It's back to the silent majority. I'm absolutely persuaded of it. And they have such a vaudevillian in Limbaugh, such a compelling character in Limbaugh, and we're going to have Mario Cuomo once a week. He'll get licked there, too.
We got time for two more questions. Here.
Yes, thank you. My name is Steve Stepek. I'm a teacher in Somerville, Massachusetts.
Somerville?
Somerville, right next door. I have a question concerning the remarks that you made about the press coming under a greater scrutiny and concern for its accountability. I believe, having watched TV in the past 5 to 6 years, that there's been a change and an increase in the number of TV magazine shows, and I believe that most of these programs are motivated by the increase in the perfection of television technology and the proliferation of these programs worldwide, which creates an incredibly lucrative market. So the market becomes motivated by the money factor rather than the search for the truth. And a lot of times...
Wait a minute, they are not necessarily mutually exclusive, but go ahead.
Well, maybe people newer in the business than yourself are not so easily thwarted from the temptation to put money matters ahead of truth if they can rationalize that something may, may come out okay if they can get away with it because of the incredibly large amounts of revenue.
You're quite right. You're quite right about your premise. Let me, however, tell you how these things happen, and John knows this as well as I do. I go out to do a piece, and I have a producer and a researcher, and we go out, we do a piece, and boy, there is a fail-safe procedure in every news magazine and every news broadcast, but news broadcasts are working to a deadline. We're not working to the same kind of deadline in news magazines. And so we take our piece, which we have now put together after 6 or 8 weeks, and we've got to show it to the executive producer, who is really the executive editor, and the senior producer, who is the managing editor, and the individual in charge of looking at every transcript. And there is a fail-safe procedure that simply does not permit the thing that you're talking about. The reason that news magazines are so popular, or have been so popular the last few years, you're quite right. is money. An hour of New York, of NYPD, or an hour of ER may cost $1 million or $1.5 million or $2 million. An hour of 60 Minutes costs $500,000. And we deliver, and all of the prime time delivers and Dateline delivers. And when I say delivers, on the first time around, they're delivering in the first year, $20 million a year in profit. We delivered to CBS $60–70 million a year in profits. So you've got those things going. We take a certain pride at 60 Minutes in being able to say that since June the 13th of 1994, we have not done one piece on O.J. Simpson. Last question?
Last question.
Okay. Good evening. I'm Maimuna Mills. I'm a Shorenstein Fellow. You did recently a piece on corruption in Nigeria.
Yes.
And a lot of us Africans thought it was very narrow.
Very narrow?
Yes. And you got a letter, a very irate letter, from a journalism professor from Michigan State University, whom you called the following day. Can you tell us why you called him and spoke with him at great length and what you talked about?
Well, I don't remember that particular call because I got a lot of calls. We did a story about corruption in Nigeria, and for those of you who didn't see it, let me tell you quickly what happened. In my estimation, I've done a certain amount of traveling. I have never seen a country and an economy quite as baldly corrupt as that of Nigeria, and we said so on the air. Incidentally, Wole Soyinka, who was the Nobel Prize winner from Nigeria, in his own home there outside of Lagos, said that exactly the same thing. Well, what we did was, in going into the, we had hidden cameras, and when we went into the airport, we found that as soon as we tried to get into the country, they wouldn't stamp our passports unless, so it cost us, the crew, about $200 apiece just to get into the country without waiting for hours. And then in order to get our equipment into the country, it cost, they wanted $8,000 just to let our equipment in. All of this, mind you, on camera. They didn't know it, but on camera. In any case, we put the piece eventually on the air, and it's a well-known, I mean, it's a really, when I say well-known, scam that is going on in Nigeria, known to the government, known to governments across in the United States and all across Western Europe. People who write letters to presidents of businesses in America and other countries saying, I just happen to have $35 million in blocked funds here that we, et cetera, and if you will help me, I will send it to your bank account in Switzerland or Dallas or wherever. And that's the way the scam begins. There was great unhappiness on the part of the Nigerian government for a while. And then, within the last month or 6 weeks, they have arrested the people who were on that film. They are cleaning house, they say, and trying desperately to recover from the effect of that film, which was shown all through Western Europe as well. The reason that I talked to the professor from Michigan State was, look, we are responsible. If somebody, and he was a Nigerian, I believe,
Yeah.
if somebody calls to complain or writes a letter, and he's a professor at Michigan State, I want to know if we made a mistake. By the time we got through, I think that he acknowledged that we were accurate in what we had portrayed. I thank you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, whenever we give out an award, a career award, it's not only a piece of paper, but we feel that anyone who has had a career as long and as distinguished as Mike, deserves something to sit on, which is equally distinguished and venerable. There is nothing more venerable than a Harvard chair. Right there.
Incidentally, for those of you at the Neiman Fellowship, the Michigan Journalism Fellows are infinitely more interesting.
Let me just, boo indeed, right. Nothing better than a Neiman. Just in wrapping up, just in wrapping up, let me remind all of you that tomorrow morning, starting at 9:30, in the penthouse of this building of the Kennedy School, we're going to have our follow-up seminar. It is called The Present and the Future of Investigative Reporting. We will have Mike and the finalists and the winners tonight all there. We hope that you will join us at that time. We're delighted that you were here this evening. Thank you all very, very much indeed. Thanks again.
Right?